Now that the deal is done, the fun has just begun. But realistically though, there's a lot that needs to happen, and let's dive into the details. Can't believe it. Can finally say Microsoft now owns Activision / Blizzard. They own them outright. Yeah, there's some caveats with the FTC, but Microsoft has shipped the money over to Activision and the deal is finalized. So what happens now? Like, this is a really big question. Phil Spencer has put out some commentary. Microsoft has put out some commentary. And so it's really important to understand, like, what is going to happen now in the next stages of this acquisition. While what seems to be the hard part, right? The get it through all the regulatory stuff, that appears to be the hard part. That's not the hard part. That is the easy part, right? If you think about what Microsoft has ahead for them, they had a theory, and now they have to turn that theory craft into reality, into a business model, into many other things. And so the point of this video is to kind of work through the stages of what Microsoft is going to have to do with its huge Xbox acquisition, because this is a big one, right? But nearly $70 billion dues is how much Microsoft paid. Its last large acquisition was LinkedIn at $26.2 billion. So this is really amping it up in terms of leverage and how much money has gone out the door. And so let's dive into the details here about what is happening and what is going to be happening next with Xbox. So to kick it off here and sort of, I say wrap up the legal side, Brad Smith, who is the chief legal counsel, not me, Brad Smith, put out a blog post basically kicking things off by saying, look, we respect the legal agreements that are in place when it comes to unions. We are not going to try to break anything up with the CWA. They're going to respect these neutrality agreements with the unions, and that is the path that they're planning to take going forward. They're not saying they're necessarily for unions, but they're also not saying they are against them either, and that they're willing to work. And again, remember, Microsoft made a lot of promises throughout this more than a year and a half ordeal to different unions, to different entities, to different government agencies, to different companies. And now Microsoft is on the hook for upholding those promises, right? You can't just back away and be like, haha, we own Activision, we're going to screw over everything. Like, that doesn't work. You have to actually uphold these. And so this is starting Microsoft off on that right foot of saying that they are actually going to hold it. Now, the other interesting thing that has also come out and likely is going to be happening is it relates to Bobby Kotick. Remember, prior to Microsoft acquiring Activision, there was a lot of turmoil around Activision, Blizzard, and Bobby himself. And a lot of it was believed that once the acquisition closed, he would exit stage left. And now Microsoft is not kicking him out per se, but he has made commentary to Bloomberg saying, look, by the end of the year, I'm going to go focus on philanthropic efforts. And that is his true official exit stage left strategy for walking away from Microsoft. And let's be honest, like, he cashed out and he exited with a huge paycheck and a huge stock sale. And so, you know, that is just the way that narrative is going to come to an end. It's a really big change for everything. And Microsoft is now taking the reins and leading Activision, which sort of bleeds into the next strategy here. And it's, when are these games coming to Xbox Game Pass? Phil Spencer has gone on a bit of a quasi-media tour, and this is falling right in line with expectations. These games are not going to be coming until 2024 at the earliest. Keep in mind that Microsoft was not legally allowed to make any sort of decision for Activision prior to them actually owning it. So even though it looked like things were going to pass and everything, and it looked like maybe games were going to slip into game, but like, no, that cannot happen until Microsoft actually pays it. It is a legal requirement. So now that Microsoft owns Call of Duty, Activision, Blizzard, whatever you want to call it, ABK, they can start making these decisions. And I can tell you that just putting games into Game Pass isn't like checking in a little box somewhere. Like, there's a lot of requirements getting into Game Pass. You have to pass certain testing, licensing requirements, right? Like, you've got to do entitlements on accounts. Speaking from like the back-end infrastructure that needs to be in place to serve a game, so like they know that if you are paying for Game Pass, you can play the game. There's things, mechanics that have to happen that could not happen prior to Microsoft owning them, because again, they couldn't tell ABK what to do. So these things are going to start to happen. And then like the next big question is, how is Microsoft going to roll this stuff out? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to just drop all these games on a single like imagine like February 3rd, picking a random day. This doesn't mean anything. Like, all of the catalog is coming to Game Pass on this day. That is great, but what Xbox and marketing people love are moments, like marketing moments, where it's like, okay, here's the first 2 titles from the Activision catalog landing in Game Pass. And they can repeat that narrative over and over and over again and keep getting those press cycles to really hype up Game Pass. And that's how they're going to hope to grow the platform. So I expect it to be a trickle over time is how Microsoft is going to do it. We don't know exactly when Call of Duty, and Call of Duty is in quotations because there's Call of Duty, the current release, and there's Call of Duty, that massive back catalog. And I think it's natural to expect that the back catalog will start to bleed in, and then at some point there will be a day and date release where it just lands on Game Pass. But we know that's not happening this year because for multiple reasons. 1, Microsoft legally couldn't, and 2, they're not going to hand over $68 billion. Then the first time they could have a $1 billion weekend, they're not going to walk away from that, right? They're not dumb. And so that is sort of the first big thing, is like, let's look to see how Microsoft are going to start bringing these games to market. But look at their actual catalog here. Now, this comes from Clobrill on Twitter. He is a wonderful follow if you like Xbox imagery. And Microsoft has effectively gone from a 16:9 resolution to a 21:9 resolution. Like, you really need a wide screen to be able to fit all these different titles in there. Microsoft has a significant catalog now at this point, and I'm not expecting them to do any acquisitions here in the near future. Maybe some technology related, I'm not really sure. But you can see all of these titles have their own story, their own narrative, how they could come to Game Pass, and how Microsoft can leverage this IP to help grow Game Pass. I mean, the studio catalog is impressive. And Microsoft has an empire, if you will, of content that Microsoft can now go to war with and try to win over more gamers to its platform. And its platforms are not just Xbox, it's also mobile, it's also PC, it's also cloud, right? And it's also, honestly, on other platforms. PlayStation will become part of that narrative, especially with a game like Call of Duty at the end of the day. Which kind of leads into the next point here, is that somebody's going to interpret this negative, and this is absolutely not intended to be negative, but Phil Spencer and company have effectively bet their careers on this acquisition. If you are in a position of leadership and you convince the board and your team and everybody else that you should be allowed to spend $70 billion, or nearly $70 billion, and it does not go well. Like, if they don't see Game Pass growth, if they don't see Xbox growing up into a serious platform, that is, your career will be over, right? You can't spend that kind of money without things being on an upward trajectory in a very serious manner, because this is a ton of money that it took Microsoft a long time to make and to be able to position to do this. So Phil Spencer is quite literally betting his career on this. Now, it's not just he's walking in and saying, here, I can put my chips on black and that's what we're going to do. Microsoft very clearly has established that there's a business model that seems to make sense, right? They've done some acquisitions, and clearly they can map it to some growth within Game Pass and Xbox in general. And so they believe that they reached a point where if you spend more, you will grow more. And that is how Microsoft got to this point with Activision. And they also probably saw some writing on the wall, right? They're seeing a consolidation of the gaming industry. There's Xbox, there's Sony, there's Nintendo. There used to be a Sega, there used to be other players, but these studios are consolidating, right? Obviously, EA is another one, GTA Take-Two is another big one. There's Ubisoft, but there's definitely been a consolidation, and Microsoft saw the opportunity to snatch up one of the essential players with one of the essential first-person shooters, Call of Duty, and made that maneuver, and that is their justification based on the fact that they had a model that they believe works. Now, part of the theory craft here, if you will, is that this model will continue to work. That, right, quite literally spending more means you will grow more. Well, what if they spent more and they don't maintain a certain growth rate? That is a very serious problem. Keep in mind, their catalog is filled to the brim. So it's really going to come down to execution and marketing rather than content, because content is king. I've said that for decades, and Microsoft knows that, and Sony has a lot of good content, and now Xbox has a lot of good content too. And so by bringing this all in-house, it's now coming down to an execution issue. Issue is the wrong word. That's a negative connotation. It comes down to an execution methodology that Microsoft really quickly needs to figure out, right? Starfield was a good launch. Hopefully Microsoft saw some growth from that, and they know that by releasing certain games on a certain cadence that they should be able to continue this growth at a very healthy rate that justifies this massive acquisition. The real downside here is that what you may see, and I still think this might happen one way or another, is there might actually be a write down of the assets. Not a write off, but a write down, meaning that potentially Microsoft overpaid. I still am not sure if Microsoft overpaid for Activision, but I tend to believe that they may have somewhat. But at the end of the day, it really just depends on the value that they're going to assign to Game Pass growth. And so that is a really, really key metric here to be watching, because Microsoft now is in a position where that if it can execute effectively, right, they need big titles hitting very consistently for a subscription model to work. That is what they have effectively sold to the market, sold to their investors, and sold to the board of directors, that look, if we can get consistent game output at a high quality, we will absolutely own this growing segment, and we can find a new way and a new multi-billion-dollar business to support. Not that Xbox wasn't already a multi-billion-dollar business, but Microsoft is really going for the jugular here and being able to own the segment and be the leader of the segment, which they currently are not. And so it'll be super interesting to see what happens here in the year ahead, the strategy that Microsoft takes. Because keep in mind, one of the compelling reasons that Microsoft bought this catalog of content is that Microsoft still believes that they can launch a mobile app store, a mobile game store more specifically, and that they could not do that without King and without Call of Duty and without these other titles. And so that is going to be an essential thing to watch here, because that is a key part of this growth strategy that currently does not exist. You can imagine a world where Microsoft becomes the de facto game platform on mobile devices, something Microsoft has long has had such high hopes to be able to do. Not necessarily be a gaming platform on mobile devices, but just a mobile segment, right? They had Windows Mobile. Then they bought Nokia, and they tried so hard to get into mobile. And this is their last real chance to do it, which is part of the reason why Phil Spencer is like, look, if we don't spend this money now, we will never have a chance again to get into the mobile space in any meaningful capacity, because they're not going to do another mobile phone. The Surface Duo isn't going anywhere. And so Microsoft is not going to spin up another OS for mobile devices. That is simply not going to happen. So that justifies this $70 billion transaction that Phil Spencer and company are betting their careers on. Just keep in mind that this is a huge bet by Microsoft. This isn't some tiny thing that Microsoft just is doing. This is cataclysmic to the future of Xbox. And I don't want this video to come off negative. In fact, I think it's now is probably the most exciting time to be following Xbox and see what is going on, because this catalog is just expansive. The question becomes is, how is Microsoft going to find a way to execute and deliver on the promises that they have made by acquiring this much content? Because at the end of the day, Xbox certainly has value. It has a lot of growth potential right now, but they've got to turn that potential growth into kinetic growth, meaning actual material of dollars coming in the door. Everything that they have up until now has been theory craft, and now they're putting that $68 billion bet on the table that they can get more value than what they're actually putting in. It is going to be fascinating to watch how Microsoft does this. It is going to be a lot of pressure. Realistically, the hard work for Phil Spencer just starts now. Like, right? Getting to this point was the easy part. Now they have to execute. Now they have to get growth. Now they have to get games out the door. Now they have to create a compelling product that is going to attract new people into the ecosystem, which is not easy to do. I think this is going to be super interesting to watch. This is a business case study of business case studies. I'm so happy that it is with Xbox. It's things that I love. And yeah, I don't know. The fun starts now, guys. And you should keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.